our urge to consume, to keep up with people. We see other people consuming, we want to be part of it. Even my own reporting, my carbon footprint, flying around the world, has an enormous impact. In fact, I can do all the conserving with light bulbs and insulation and efficient boilers in my house, and then I can blow it all with one trip to northern India. So I think that these are important messages that many religions have, and I do hope that the Encyclical will bring out a sort of a larger discussion of moral responses.
I'm speaking as a feminist, so I come and I trained as a Catholic theologian, so I've had quite a lot of interaction with, let's call it the darker side of the Catholic tradition. So when we look at Laudato Si, from a point of view of knowing the field of religion and ecology, there is really nothing new in this document in terms of the research and the perspective that's been studied. So why is it so radical, or why is it so significant? And I would say it is the best religious statement on climate change. I would agree with Kevin, who said this earlier, and I think it's the concept of integral ecology. The Pope is addressing two things. He's addressing both the whole earth and the whole world. So what I mean by that, the whole earth, his focus on integral ecology is a blend of religion and science. He starts the document with science. Very few other documents start with science, and also there's no other document of this length that's come from religious leaders. There's lots of academics who've killed many trees publishing in this area. So his understanding of, let's say, water biodiversity, pollution, it's very good. So his science is overall very good. So I'm not going to concentrate on that, but his understanding that we need to have ecological literacy if we're going to do religion and ecology is a very significant point. Why it works in terms of addressing the whole world is that he's looking at the human roots of the ecological crisis. So in parts of the world, that's consumerism, waste, lack of respect. He uses one time in Laudato Si the notion that other species have intrinsic value. Otherwise, the document is very anthropocentric. But there's one phrase that actually you read this morning, that Justin, that one phrase is the intrinsic value. But he does look at values, so individualism, ignorance, weak ethics, political apathy, cultures of affluence, greed, indifference, corruption. This is what the bulk of the document's about, and this is what the bulk of the talks were about in the US. So he has a race, class, gender, cultural analysis. This is what we call intersectionality and liberation theology. And I went to Latin America to study with Gustavo Gutierrez in Peru to study liberation theology, and he said the issue of the world is that the North has had a moral lobotomy. And I think that is a very useful phrase for what the Pope is doing here in North America, about addressing the moral lobotomy in the affluent and influential parts of the world. But I also would agree with Maureen Dowd, who wrote in the New York Times, Francis preaches against the elites while keeping the church an elite's boys' club. So I'm not going to talk further about that, but that is a fact, and that it simply can't be ignored. But he does detail, especially in the UN talk, and certainly in Laudato Si, that the gross injustice and the severe maldistribution of benefits and burdens around the world, this is what he's doing. But he's also doing it in a way that's dealing with power, because power is the centerpiece of this kind of theological method. And this theological method is about social ethics. How does the world work? So the people who say that he's separating theology from politics are incorrect, because this is a standard liberation theology method. It focuses on power, privilege, economics, structural inequities, and injustice.
I would say that I was making the case not necessarily that the Pope is explicitly, although I would be totally unsurprised, drawing on the religion, the sort of indigenous cosmological frames informing the legal innovations around the rights of Mother Nature. I would say that the Encyclical seems to be suggest an awareness of it, but that the language of the Encyclical is intentionally open-ended in that pluralistic way, and that was a strategic choice that I'm associating with the kind of mode of global citizenship up here in the transnational advocacy space. And that could be appropriative, but in that mode, right? When we talk about the politics of enculturation locally, there are other things one might say about that. You know, the church's, efforts to be part of local communities and to be the pastoral agent of those communities. That's a different thing.
I think you could make the same point in reference to the Chinese traditions that I was describing. I think that the Pope could have done much more, been more explicit and at length in the Encyclical on drawing on other traditions around the world and how this speaks that this is something that is fermenting, it's happening. But the language is open-ended enough that I think that there's the opportunity to do that.
To be appropriated by.
Right.
In the transnational space. Just one quick little thing I would add, because it occurred to me when either you or you were talking, which is it reminds me of the moment of the construction of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. In the late 40s, when that was being hammered out, one of the things that the commission responsible for it, that Eleanor Roosevelt was chairing, was, does this speak across civilizations and cultures in an authoritatively moral way that we can reliably present it as an international consensus? And they went around, and we might, raise questions about how comprehensive this was at the time, and they surveyed, global civilizations and cultures, and arrived at the conclusion that notions like human dignity were in some way or other articulable across all of those traditions. And by traditions, they usually meant something like world historical religions.
Environmental reporting is one area, unlike human rights and certain other areas, that there has been more freedom of maneuver for the Chinese media. And this gets back to the point that I was making, I think, earlier, that in a country as big as China, as complicated as it is, I think there's an awareness on the part of the government that they cannot do this from the top down, that they need feedback mechanisms, and feedback mechanisms include the media, local media, and also NGOs and civil society. And that's why one of the really fascinating things about what they're doing, in my view, in China, and in opening up some space for whether it's Buddhist or Confucianist or Taoist or whatever, for people to kind of think of themselves as something other than Chinese citizens, but also to have an identification with, this is what my Taoist precepts teach me to do, or what I think of as a Confucianist. And that's going to lead to a lot of engagement at the local level. It's also risky on the part of the government. I think the government knows they need it. But historically, there have been a number of dynasties that have fallen in China when religious activism has come forward.
Working on a story right now about the relatively low carbon footprint or small carbon footprint of Northern Europe. And the background of that is that people can live, and I'm not saying that they have that's the final goal that everybody should aspire to, but you can have a good life and use a lot fewer resources than we use in the United States. And you don't have to run that as an opinion story. That's a factual story.